start yelling, it'll start going red.
Interesting. Ah! Oh, there it went.
Yeah.
My bad.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
We got new mics.
Hi, guys. Look
at
how
us.
comfortable we are.
Yes.
This is really
We'll figure it
comfortable.
out. Just give us a couple weeks. All right.
Bridget, do you want to start us off with something to talk about?
Sure, I sure do. We had a couple of topic ideas today that we wanted to go over. And one of them, I believe, was how you could be contributing to some of your dog's issues. Not to owner shame, but it is a good idea to take a look at the whole picture of how you're living with your dog and what we may be doing that could be causing us to have a little bit of a hard time in our training.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like what areas maybe you're exacerbating or feeding into issues, and then maybe areas where you're adding limitations to your dogs that don't actually exist.
Sure.
Or characterizing them in a certain way that isn't actually true to like who they are, their behaviors at that point. And then also maybe situations where it truly is the dog's
fault. Yeah.
it really is the dog, and it's not necessarily anything that you are doing or not doing. With I think the statement we were kind of analyzing or looking at was like it's not the dog, it's the owner. There's no bad dogs, there's only bad owners.
Yes.
Like things like that. There's that big mantra of like no bad dogs. There's bad dogs.
Yeah, there are bad dogs.
There's some bad
sorry.
dogs out there.
There are some real bad dogs.
Yeah.
And there are bad owners. But, how can we all recognize and hold ourselves accountable for things that we may be doing in our dog's lives that are causing like reactivity or resource guarding behaviors, and how can we adjust those things to live ultimately a happier, more successful life with our dogs?
Were you going to say something?
No.
Oh, this is
I was trying to think.
this is our new employee.
Oh, yes.
He
You
just
might not have
started here,
recognized
actually.
him.
Yeah.
His name is Jameis. Not to be confused
Not
with
to be
our
confused.
ex-employee, Seamus.
Yeah. He was kind of weird.
Yeah,
He was a bit of a nerd.
Yeah.
He had to go.
But nice to be joining you guys.
Welcome. This is kind of your interview, so
Yeah.
you better
Yeah.
do
This
well.
is perfect. Well, I think one of the big things that I kind of have seen in the past with like a big thing that owners do is sometimes on the walk, but mostly kind of in the house, where they kind of like will baby talk the dogs in terms of redirecting them out of certain behaviors instead of just addressing the actual issues. I don't know if that kind of pertains to kind of in
like
the scope of what we're talking about, but
you mentioned the client that you have right now, like is having issues with her dog resource guarding, and she kind of essentially trades him when he does have an object that she doesn't want him to have.
Yes.
And she'll throw treats on the ground rather than addressing it. And to no fault of her own, she's probably had to sacrifice some of the things that she'd like to do with him out of fear of him biting her. So it's a good example, like how are we inevitably allowing these behaviors to go on?
Resource guarding is an interesting thing in and of itself.
Sure.
That could be interesting to talk about at some point more in depth, because
Yeah.
I think a lot of advice that people give, first of all, any type of aggressive behaviors your dog is having, don't take advice from people on the internet. They haven't seen the situation, and any like good dog trainer, unless it's through like a virtual consult where they're actually speaking with you one-on-one, isn't going to try to give you advice for aggressive behaviors just like generally over the internet, because it can be really dangerous. But I think it's interesting that a lot of advice that people give pertaining to resource guarding is advice that you should maybe use with young dogs that maybe you're seeing like beginning stages of it,
or to prevent it from
escalating. Happening. Yeah, rather than like if you have like I have a client that has a Great Pyrenees that's full blown resource guarding, the food, the crate, like things like that. Like we're not trading We're not, I walk up to you and when you start growling and lunging and snapping, I throw you food so you know I'm not a threat and I'm not taking it away. We're
This
not,
isn't a
we're
compromise.
past,
Yeah.
like we're past the point of doing that type of exercise with a dog. Like there's a different avenue you have to take when you have like a case that has gotten to the severity that it is at that point. So my mind went down a little rabbit trail, but resource guarding would be something interesting to talk about at some point because I think it's very misunderstood.
And yes, and
You
how
can't like true resource guarding, and I guess it kind of pertains to our topic in the fact that if your dog is a true resource guarder, there's nothing you could have done to prevent it.
Right.
it's very biological and ingrained in them, inherited in them, in their genes and their genetic makeup. And yes, why we can do things that escalate it, like we were talking about.
Yeah.
Ultimately, we can't.
You can't
change
prevent
a dog.
it.
Yeah, you can't prevent it, but you can work on things that to manage it. You can work on feeding routines. Like my brother's dog Odie was rehomed because he was a horrible resource guarder. He's with my brother now, and he's doing just fine because my brother has a solid routine with him, and he's able to be successful with that dog in a variety of situations because of the way he's handling it in the situations he's not putting that dog in.
Yeah. Like with Snoop, he is a dog that I guarantee that if he was in a home that didn't know how or wasn't equipped to deal with the potential of resource guarding, that he would, because he's a very possessive dog. I saw it. Well, and possession doesn't always equal resource guarding. I saw an interesting post. There's a protection sports like Decoy that I follow. Canine Mike is his name. He has a lot of really interesting information on his Instagram, but he was talking about how the tie between like what is possessive and possession and what is resource guarding and how they overlap. And I believe he said that like all dogs who resource guard are possessive, but not every possessive dog will resource guard. But Snoop, I think, is definitely a dog that could have very easily gone down that route. And so he was one where it was like, I could have seen those behaviors as a puppy, and the behaviors I saw were like, he had like a chicken foot, and I like walked by him and he like hit it. You know what I mean?
And
like he
what
didn't,
did you do?
Yeah, like he didn't like overtly do anything resource guarding,
Sure.
but he was like very possessive of it and very on edge
Yes.
and like, this is mine. And even now, like when I give him things, he'll take it and he'll go somewhere very isolated. And then if another dog were to like end up in the same general area, he moves. And then he moves.
Yes.
And then he moves.
And he's doing it. It's almost like a healthy behavior because he's moving away rather
Exactly.
than
Right.
chasing
He's
or
trying to avoid the
guarding
situation.
or
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, but a lot of the work I did with him when he was young was like he has something valuable. When I approach, I give him something valuable. And I worked on that because, especially with humans, I didn't want to see that possessiveness escate into
this was
like
with
a
him as
worse
a
behavior.
puppy, his development.
12 weeks old.
So this wasn't a situation that was dangerous. at all.
No, not at all. And so that's something where, again, like as the human, that I couldn't change the fact that he had a very possessive personality, but my behaviors 100% were going to influence the severity of that behavior and where it was going to go from that point, basically.
Yeah. And like the ideal that there are some trainers out there like the alpha kind of mindset where you have to be on top of everything that are like, you should take the bowl of food away from your dog 15 times during your feeding session.
Don't do that.
That's another thing I feel like owners do a lot.
You're causing so much frustration. You're causing really your dog and your relationship, them to lose trust in you, them to lose dependability in you. And what
Yeah, it's
we
just
do,
frustrating,
yeah,
you know?
yeah.
for the dog.
What we do here alternatively is we come up with a feeding routine where the bowl goes on the floor. Dog is not in any command whatsoever. There's no expectations besides you don't go for that food until you're released. And we found that to be much more effective. And I try to stand near the dog, especially if it's a resource guarder.
Yeah.
And I'm standing in their presence as they finish their meal. We don't do the slow feeders. We don't do the enrichments if we have a true resource guarder, because I do not want to prolong the process of the feeding at all. So we just go like short and sweet. Bowl comes up, feeding is done, and we move on to the next thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that I feel like a lot of clients say that, where it's like, oh, well, you know, I can put my hand in the bowl and I can take the bowl away and stuff a lot. And
If you
it's
can
just-
do that, you would have never had a dog that resource guards anyways.
right. And it's
Because
just, it can
like
be such a problem.
doing those behaviors when they're young did not allow them to grow up and not resource guard. They were just never going to do it.
Yeah.
That doesn't change anything.
Yeah. And like we have a board and training right now, and you know, upon coming and reading his paperwork, he's a terrible resource guard, is what his owners described him to be. And I truly validate and believe and empathize with her struggles with him. But it was like a laundry list, and 3 different vets had told her to euthanize this dog, and such severe behavior. And the dog came to us, and I have not seen an inkling of resource guarding. And that's not because we haven't tested it. We've done toys, we've done bones, but in reality, the other issues she was describing on top of the resource guarding sounds like it was more of a relationship issue with her perhaps being a lot more permissive and allowing these little details to get away. And then the dog feels like he owns the house.
Right.
And he can get
Yeah.
on the couch, and if she got on the couch, he'd growl and he'd show her his teeth, and it was just a very emotional process for her. So as we're updating her throughout the board and train, she like cannot believe that he's doing well.
Yeah.
And she was worried. She's like, well, he's not displaying any of this aggression toward you, so how am I going to know when he comes home that he's not going to display it toward me? So we decided to do the send home in home, which can be really, really effective to see how the dog acts in the context of their home.
Right.
But a lot of what the work that we're putting into place for these board and trains isn't just isolated to our facility.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
training doesn't end at our facility. The training doesn't end at the park. The training is full circle. We want the dog to be successful anywhere you go with it. We want the dog to be able to be stable around you, and help the owner's confidence with telling the dog like
Yeah.
to stop doing something and correcting the dog.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and a lot of that again goes back to not putting certain limitations on the dog.
Right.
Like I think we've talked about this somewhat a number of podcasts ago, that fine line between like where can you push to get more progress and where are you truly hitting like a wall where you're like, that's just not my dog.
Yeah.
Like my dog just can't do those things.
unrealistic expectations. So, you know, one of the owners, the owner said, well, I want to bring my dog around children. I have nieces and nephews and I want the dog around the children. And she's like, but the dog has bitten people and the county knows about it. We had to report it. And I said, that's not worth it to me.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, yes, we could
reward.
have the dog physically be around children, but I would probably advise them to put a muzzle on, because if we're looking at this dog's last chance
Yeah.
in being around children and the safety and health of that child, children are unpredictable.
Yeah.
So those are unrealistic expectations to think that your dog that has a bite history can freely be around a child without incident. That's something you have to monitor and supervise. And unfortunately, that's the reality of dog training.
Yep.
Yeah. Especially when it comes to like matters of safety.
Yes.
I think that's when the boundaries of like hitting certain walls come into play. Because it's like you described, like, could you? Maybe, probably, but should you?
Right.
Is kind of the question you always want
Yes.
to ask. I have a client that I was working with that has a Doberman that's somewhat anxious and, you know, a little bit fearful of things, and maybe more genetically than most maybe would be. And we just did a lesson that was purely like getting her up and over the agility equipment, doing the treadmill, doing the slap mill, like doing all of the weird, like she's always had trouble with elevations and textures and like uneven stuff and everything. And it took me maybe like 10 minutes each thing to get her to where she wasn't like 100. Well, the agility equipment she loved once she did it, but like the treadmill and the slap mill, she was still a little bit nervous, but doing it and competent with it. And it was interesting because the owner, he actually said, he's like, as she was walking on the treadmill with him, he's like, every time I bring her here, I'm realizing that much more how much it's not her. He's like, because he's like, I think I worry more than she even does about things. He's like, I worry about her worry. And I overthink it and
overcompensate for a lot of things.
Yeah. And so that's, I think, a good example of like his concern for like her mental state and always being happy and confident and calm and prioritizing that over, well, sometimes you got to like go through a little bit of stress to get through it on the other side and realize that it wasn't that big of a deal. And I think that was interesting that he even brought that up where he's like, seeing you do all this stuff with her, because we did a lesson with a crate. She was very, very apprehensive about going in crates, and he honestly wasn't able to ever get her in one. And so we did a whole lesson with one of the rough toughs, and by the end she was going in completely off leash on verbal command. And but it was it was a struggle the first portion of it. We were all sweating, and then
she's used to probably giving up that fight.
Oh yeah, she was alligator rolling.
Yeah.
She was screaming.
Throwing a tantrum.
Throwing tantrums. It was very ugly.
Because it's worked in the past.
Just for the mere thought of me walking her close to it with the leash.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't use e-collar for it, like nothing. Yeah. And at the end of the lesson, he even said, which I think is a very important thing to note, he was like, when you started this with her, was there even a thought in your head that you weren't going to be able to do it? And I said, no, because there can't be.
Right.
If I'm going to do this and I'm going to start doing this, it's going to happen.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like we're going to make it happen.
Yep.
Yeah. And our accidentally, subconsciously, and we're not doing it on purpose, humans often coddle dogs emotionally.
Yeah.
And we come up with all of these human-based emotions that the dog is feeling, and then that is our excuse for when to not push the dog. Oh, he can't do this because he gets really anxious in the crate.
Yeah.
Or she can't do that because she doesn't like going out in public, so we walk at 4 a.m. And all of these things that we're doing, we're just allowing our dogs to ultimately run the show when we can be the leader in that situation and show them like you are going to do this.
Right.
And we are going to do this, and we're going to be successful within reason.
Yes.
You know, with things that are smart decisions and things that can be pushed.
Well, and because you could argue that like, oh, Michelle, like, why would you push it to be done in one session? Why couldn't you just do like little by little and slowly desensitize? Again, we're kind of past that.
Right.
Like this dog has had years of winning, of not going in the crate. So it's like, you could try to coax and throw food, and you don't think he's tried that before?
Right.
You don't think he's tried all of these, nicer ways to do it? No, when it comes down to it, for a certain type of dog, if they truly have like a very strong aversion to something, like a true phobia almost, like you can't really go like a gradual route most of the time.
Right.
If she was a puppy, if I got her when she was a puppy, would I do that with a puppy? No, I wouldn't. But we're talking about a fully grown adult dog that has just learned that she can use her size and her mouth and her teeth and all of these things to get what she wants. And ultimately, that's not going to work. You have to get in the crate.
Yeah, you have to show them that they can have that success and that it's not as scary as they think it is or whatever.
Yeah.
Like nail trimming, for example, as
Exactly,
well, right?
yeah.
It's something that's just like the dogs freak out because it's not something that is done every day. And that's understandable, but it doesn't mean that they get to have to win that fight and avoid it, for the rest of their life just because they don't know what's going on, right?
Yep.
Do the steps, do the proper steps, and have that success with them. And then the next time, I'm sure, like, if you run through that again with that same dog, it'll be something where maybe she'll be perfect. Maybe she got over the fear or whatever, and she'll go right in. But maybe she might be a little hesitant at first. but I can almost guarantee that it's not going to be as bad as the first rep, the gator rolls and stuff. You know,
She's literally never had trouble going in a crate ever since.
yep. See,
Yes.
there you go.
And it's
Right?
like-
So
She
it's-
went home. He said crate. She ran into the crate.
Yep.
He went home and he set up the crate because he didn't even have it out.
he couldn't.
He told her crate. She walked in. She went in the crate.
Yep.
When we were here for this
tables got
most
turned.
recent lesson, we hadn't done crate here in weeks. We were at this most recent one. Right at the end of the lesson, he's like, can I just see if she'll go in that crate again? And I said, sure. The one that, was so stressful for her and she probably has so many bad memories with. He opened the door, said crate. She walked right in and laid down.
Yep.
Like, it's sometimes you can't overthink it. You can't think too much
Yes.
into that stuff.
And that's
Can't put too much emotion in it.
That's
Yeah.
why people hire us, is because we're able to look at the entire picture, because we don't have our relationship isn't solely based on the affection or the love of that dog. Yes, I do love your dogs and we have a strong connection, but I'm looking at the behavior first as opposed to the humans looking at it, the owners looking at it from a state of like, I don't want to do anything that's going to damage our relationship.
Right.
Yeah.
Which we totally
Which
get
so
and
many people do.
understand. So it's up to us to show them that these things are possible.
Yep.
And the behaviors that they may be doing that are fueling the fire in their homes with their dogs.
And will actually create a better relationship with your
Yes.
dog. Once you can work through it, it's amazing how better a relationship I've seen with clients and their dogs after the training, just because there can be that clear communication. you know?
Yes.
Well, because like what you're saying, that's a point I was going to make, is that the relationship that people think they're going to damage with their dog, you're viewing it as like a human to human
Yes.
relationship.
Yeah.
That's not how the relationship should be with a dog. Like, this is an animal.
Yeah.
Right.
They don't need love. A dog that like lives in a house where even if you didn't give affection to it, it would be fine. They like affection is not really something that they need to
It's a
have.
human-based thing that we create in dogs.
Yeah.
When we give over affection, and like affection can be one of the greatest downfalls of your life with your dog, and when you're offering that affection, how you're offering that affection, and that can make things so much worse. Where I'm not saying don't give affection. I'm very affectionate with my dogs.
Yeah.
But how could it be contributing to the issues that you're having?
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Because I mean, there is so many pieces of the puzzle that are owner influenced and dog influenced equally, and I think a lot of how you behave with your dog has to be in reference and in context to what kind of dog they are. Like, I'm different with all three of my dogs.
Yep.
I'm a different person to all three of them because I have to be what works best with their individual personalities.
Yeah. And that's what makes us, I think, good at what we do, is that we're able to show people how to be the person that your dog needs you to be. And we have to kind of have a wake-up call sometimes. Some people are very open to it. Some people need a little bit of a talking to in a professional, safe space, that they are the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's not to be judgmental, but sometimes you are the problem.
Right.
Like that Pyrenees that I'm working with right now, like we had talked today to clarify a few things about her feeding process that she was struggling with the dog. And because she has another dog in the house that the dog will guard food from, and then also from her. And so something that she had said today, because a lot of times when you have a dog that is that bad with resource guarding, when you start doing the food bowl goes down, you're released to eat it, and I will be standing right here while you eat, they won't eat. They won't come over and eat because they're very uncomfortable.
Yes.
They're not uncomfortable because you corrected them for running over. They're uncomfortable because they're used to being able to establish possession over the object
not
and
getting
the
what they
food.
want.
This is
And when you
mine.
can't
Yeah.
if you walk away, you allow them to do that, right? If you stand there and make them eat the food in front of you and force their hand where this is your only option, you eat while I'm standing here, or you just don't eat.
Right.
You have a dog will, depending on how strong-willed they are and how long they want to go, they won't eat for a few days. They're not going to starve themselves. They'll
They
eat
will
eventually.
not starve themselves.
They will eat eventually.
Yes.
But she was doing that, and she'd pick the food back up, take it out, and then she'd feed her other dog. And she said she just felt bad because then the dog who resource guards had to hear and watch the other dog eating their food and everything. And I said, I don't care.
Right.
And
In a
I
nice
truly
way.
said that to her in a nice
Yeah,
way.
we don't
And
care.
she has the personality. She's very similar to me in that. And I told her, I was like, but do we really care? I
Right.
said, this dog has tried to attack you. Do you care? And she's like, oh, you're right. See, this is why I need you. I don't care. And I was like, you don't care. You can't care.
Yeah.
Because the dog also doesn't care.
I was
She's
gonna say
not
that, too.
hearing
Dog
that
doesn't
and
care.
seeing that and being like, oh no.
Dogs
Well, he
aren't-
My
gets to
mom
eat and I
hates
don't.
me. I don't
It's
get
like,
to
well, we just gave you the
eat.
chance to, and you didn't. So.
Yeah, you had the option.
Exactly.
You chose not to. So
Right.
we'll try again at dinner.
Yeah.
That's
know?
like the unhealthiest mindset you can have with your dog is like we create human emotions, like somehow feeling like they're going to feel sad or bad or hurt feelings. Like
Yeah.
we would have hurt feelings if our moms gave our siblings dinner and was like, you can't have any right now.
Yeah.
It's not the same.
Like our emotions create such an interesting dynamic with the dog. Like and a specific instance I've seen that stands out to me in a couple of cases is that when dogs, so say you have like even a puppy or even just a regular age dog, and they seem to be more bonded to like one owner than the other. Something maybe because that owner's just home with them more, does more with them, whatever. I've seen the person who feels kind of like left out or like not part of it get very like sad and dejected, and they bring that energy into the mix, and then the dog even more so doesn't want to spend time with them.
Yep.
Or you're trying to
the
overcompensate.
snowball.
Yeah.
Or the snowball of, so the one walks the dog, or the one plays with the dog more, or the one does the feed, whatever it may be, right? Or like you said, or just is home more. And then the other person just kind of like accepts that and is just like, well, okay, like I guess I won't really
They don't
try
try.
to do that stuff.
Yeah.
And so of course you're not helping the situation in that. And then especially if you're getting like upset about it, it's
Yeah.
like, well, clearly there's an issue, and it's just you not involving yourself,
Yeah, and taking it personally.
Right.
That's the biggest piece of it, I think, is that making it
almost
out
blaming
to be
the dog.
that like they have some vendetta against you. Like your dog cannot resent you.
Yeah.
They're not angry at you.
And if you correct your dog and it does something like tear something up or poops, it's not
Yeah.
out of spite.
Yeah, it's
I'm
not
sorry to
spite.
tell you that one of the cringiest things that I hear is like, oh, he did it out of spite. No, he didn't, Karen.
No,
He didn't do it out of spite.
no, they can't do it out of spite. Maybe they do it for attention. Like dogs will,
Or out of confusion.
pee or poop or something because they know then if you spend all day ignoring them, if they do that, you pay attention to them, or like you said, in moments where it's maybe following a correction or a change in their lifestyle or their environment or something, it could just be stress, confusion.
Yep.
They don't really know what to do, but it's not emotion based. It's not
Exactly.
happening.
Yeah.
But yeah, so because when say you have a dog that seems like it's bonded to your partner, your spouse, or whatever a little bit more than you, the worst thing you can do is then like take that personally and then shut yourself off.
Yeah.
It's an animal. You have to be the one like bridging that gap of trying to build the relationship and get the relationship better. You have to be the one willing to make the first move on that, not the dog.
Right.
Even in instances where maybe it's something as severe as maybe the dog has tried to bite you a couple times, or resource guards, or, like if you have a setting where it's one person has had this dog and maybe the dog has trouble with accepting a new person moving in or living with them or whatever, and doesn't like you as much. If you as like that person are the only one that can really try to make the change.
Yep.
The dog is not going to change on its own. Like,
And-
you have to follow, they have
Yeah.
to follow you with that change.
Like affection and treats and overcompensating in the wrong ways is going to only do your relationship more harm. Like how many couples come in and they're like, well, I'm the good cop, he's the bad cop. Like you both need to have some level of control over this dog.
Yep.
And it's pretty unacceptable if you're allowing your spouse to or your partner to be the only one that's correcting the dog.
Well,
Like,
how many times does the good cop have more problems?
yes, the
than
good
bad
cop
Yeah.
You know
has
what I
more
mean?
problems.
It happens I see it all the time where it's just like, well, yeah, they listen to him because he's the bad cop, but then when I'm like giving him affection or I'm giving the treats and stuff, they just don't care. you
And
know?
somehow thinking that it's wrong to set boundaries and limitations and give your dog direction. You
Yeah.
need to get out of that mindset. It's not wrong. Our training is not wrong. And what we're communicating to our dog is not wrong.
No, it's important and necessary for them to be successful.
So, like, when we look at the lives with our dogs, we have to say, like, what could you be doing that could be contributing to their failures or your struggles with them? And that could be how you use affection, not being on top of things, not being as consistent as your dog needs you to be, and having rules change too much and having too much gray.
Yeah.
We have to be very black and white, especially upon like in the training process when our dogs are questioning things and then they're going to see how far can I push this? She's not going to let me get away with this. So we have to just be a better leader.
And I think that's good that like you're doing that in home too, because there is definitely to some extent when the dogs go home, there's always a little bit of that. Okay, let's see what I can do.
Yes.
You know, I'm back with someone who I didn't have this structure with, who I didn't have to listen to like I did the trainer. So let me see, you know, and that's where, you know, that will be probably really good, where it's just something where you can kind of have that communication and show her exactly what she needs. And again, it's something where you're not seeing it now because you've implemented this structure. And of course, if she doesn't implement the structure at home, it's going to happen again. But so it's something where, again, it's not so much the dog. The dog's shown you that it can listen and it can understand new structure to kind of how to handle situations, how to eat properly, how to play with toys properly and stuff like that. And now it's the owner's, you know, kind of reason or purpose to kind of continue that and
It's
just
like-
transfer that over.
Like, put me in, coach. Like,
Yeah.
I'm putting you in.
Right.
And when we do in homes, and I think it's interesting, like the context of our facility and going home, there are major and massive differences.
Absolutely.
And you go in, and as you guys have done in homes, we can see like 15 things walking in the door that the people are allowing and being permissive with.
Yep.
And we're like, all right.
And again,
Let's
it's nothing against
start.
the owner.
No,
but
it's nothing against you.
Little things that, again, we notice right away, but it's just so normal to them that they
Yes.
just don't even notice. it,
Yeah,
you know?
jumping on the couch, barking at the guests coming in, jumping on people,
Yep.
just really overall naughty behaviors that we're accidentally allowing because we're so good at pinpointing and pointing it out to people.
Constantly attention grabbing.
Exactly.
Stuff like
But some people just muted because that's their life with their dog.
Yep. Yeah.
And then,
or maybe because this is the first dog that has ever been an issue.
Yeah.
Being allowed to do those things.
yes.
You know, and that goes back to what we mentioned earlier of like every dog being so individual. And just because you've been able to have dogs for years and had seemingly no issues, even though I think those behaviors are obnoxious in general, no matter what dog is doing them, but maybe they never amounted to anything dangerous, you know, but now you are having dangerous issues with your dogs and you wouldn't even put it together because you're like, oh, but I've had 5 other dogs that have done all these things and nothing has happened.
Yeah.
It's like, well,
It's like
every dog is different.
a completely different dog. Like we were just in an in-home yesterday and these people over and over, they were like, but my last shepherd didn't do this. My last shepherd didn't try to attack the cats.
This isn't your last shepherd.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's what we had to discuss. And she
that's
was like,
great, but-
she's like coming around to the thought of like, this is different. And she described how the last dog was so much easier to train than this dog. And they love this dog to death, but it's just giving them a little bit harder of a time.
Yeah. And I think it kind of, it's interesting when people are really stuck on the comparison aspect.
Yes.
Sometimes I think that happens because it almost is a way to maybe let ourselves off the hook because we're like, it's this dog. All
Yeah.
my other dogs weren't like it, but this dog is different.
Right.
And it's like, well, yeah, maybe, but that doesn't mean that it's just like, well, we have to accept this forever. Like, you just have to make changes that you're not used to having to make to be able to allow the dog to live a little bit more successfully with you.
And how can we meet the dog where it's at rather than trying to have a fantasy of how the dog should be? What can we do to address the behaviors right now that can have us have that dog that we love and that we can manage in the house?
Yeah.
And I think I mentioned this like a while ago too, but something to look at is how much your life has changed over the span of how many dogs you've had too. You know, you might have had more time to be able to do stuff with that old German Shepherd that you had or whatever, you know, again, it's something like genetically, yes,
Stuff that
every
you're not
dog is
even
different,
thinking
but
about.
it's like, yeah, but it's the things that you're not even thinking about, you know, having new people in your life, whatever, where you live differently, you know, so.
Yeah, it just never, there's never really any benefit to comparing dogs
Yes.
to other dogs. There's nothing productive about it. It's not going to give you any new information or anything. You're still stuck with this dog. So you can either continue to bum yourself out being like, man, this dog sucks compared to my last one. Or you can just be like, well, this is the dog I have. And so I have to figure out how to make it work.
If you want to make it work.
If you want to make it work,
You don't have to make it work.
it's
Yeah.
true. Nobody's forcing you. Yeah, I mean, I think maybe to kind of summarize a little bit of the idea we're talking about is that there's certainly things that as a human you can influence and create change in your dog's behaviors, but the core like temperament of the dog and who they are, that's not something that you can ever really change. You can maybe lessen the severity of like the peaks of it in certain situations, but like if you have a dog that is exhibiting like fear behaviors, you know, from a very young age, they're likely just genetically predisposed to being that way. And so you can do a lot of work with confidence building and exposure and doing all these different things, but like at their core, you really can't change that piece of it.
Yeah.
And like expecting your dog to be happy all the time or never go through the stress and peaks and pits of life. Are you happy all the time as a human? Are you always content in your life? And if you are, then good for you. I'm certainly not.
What books did you read?
Yeah.
I'd like to know.
So it takes a continuing to work with your dog and continuing to push the things that are your goals if they're doable and safe to achieve.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree.
Just because your dog is uncomfortable in one situation, like the crate, for example, does not mean that they can't work their way out of it, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's why, so like with dogs that have different temperaments and personalities and things like that, that's why you don't see, I think the clearest example of that being true and the evidence of it being true, that there's that much variance, is that you don't see all types of dogs doing all types of dog things.
Yes.
You know, like you don't have golden retrievers excelling in protection sports, and you don't have Belgian Malinois being therapy dogs. You know, it's just not aligning with their temperaments. So that is a very clear evidence that dogs are drastically different from each other and their temperaments are different. And so you can do a little bit, but you really can't do a ton to be able to change those things.
Yeah, and like even in the sporting world, like in our scent work class, little Katie, who is a like a Shih Tzu of some sort that had like one of those smush noses.
Yeah,
she could only get so far in the context of the sporting scent work world because she was just didn't have the same sense of smell as some of the other dogs in the class. But the owner knew that. Yeah. And she's like, I won't be continuing on with you guys.
Yeah.
But in behavior wise, like we look at like we're running the CGC test soon in our company.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of interest in that. And there are some dogs that, because it is a temperament test, that may not be designed to go through the test and be successful with that test. But
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that you haven't come far. That does not mean that your dog's not successful. But in reality, things like therapy work and things like that, your dog has to be just very stable.
Yeah. It's just not like a good test for you to measure your success.
Yes.
You know, it would be like
Which I think a lot of
putting
people
a fish on a treadmill and being like, oh, they couldn't run on the treadmill. They suck. It's
Yeah.
like, well, that's not a accurate test to a fish's
Sure.
abilities, you
Right.
know? So with the CGC, like, I think that's a common misconception with it, unfortunately, is that it's marketed, I think, sometimes as like a thing that if you work hard enough, you can achieve it. And that's just not, I mean, my dog couldn't pass the CGC test. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, it's not for everyone.
And that's
Because, well, there are aspects of it that, yes, you have to train and practice for, like that your dog has to sit and down and come and walk on leash and do all those things. But like, your dog has to let random people walk up to it and pet it. Your dog has to let a stranger pick up its feet and look in its ears and open its mouth and do all of these things where you could try and practice for those aspects of the test. But honestly, if you're having to try and practice for those pieces of the test, you probably shouldn't be taking the test because that's not really what the test is for. You
Yeah.
know, the test is truly to say, yes, this dog, I'm confident that in 99% of social settings, they're not going to have an aggressive reaction to anything.
Because it truly is a prerequisite for therapy dogs, and you can't have a therapy dog that could have a hint of aggression, and unfortunately you can't have a therapy dog that has a bite history.
No,
Yeah.
you can't.
And the CGC is not a test designed for you to suddenly be able to take your dog into stores or restaurants that don't allow service animals, because a service animal is different than a therapy animal, and an emotional support animal is different from a therapy dog.
They're all different.
Yes.
They're all different.
You can go online and purchase something that says your dog's a service dog, but I'm
You're getting
sorry.
scammed. Because even real service dogs don't have to have
No.
a certification.
And a real service dog doesn't have to present any paperwork to like a being in a dog friendly place. They just have to. Service dogs are task trained.
Yes,
So
to be considered a service dog, the dog has to be able to perform a task
Yeah.
that helps you with your disability. So the only thing that, because of like under the ADA, the only thing that somebody can ask you if you're bringing in what you claim to be a service dog into an area that pets are not allowed to be in, they have to ask you, is this a service dog? And then they can ask, what service does it perform for you? That's the only
That's it.
things they can ask under HIPAA. And unfortunately, people take advantage of that system and they
yes,
lie. And it makes it very difficult for people with service animals to be accepted in the general public because there's too many people out there with aggressive dogs, reactive dogs, dogs that are just a nuisance that shouldn't be qualified just because you want to take advantage of HIPAA.
I mean, I've seen so many videos
yeah.
on like social media of that where there's like someone with a service dog
Yeah.
is walking around and then just another dog just like comes into frame and just like starts sniffing the dog.
Yeah, and
And
it's
they're like, "What are you doing?"
I mean, you think like this
Easy to
animal is a dog, but it is a piece of medical equipment
Yes.
for these people. And if you're getting a dog, like dogs can perform, have abilities to help people medically that no medical device could really do.
Yeah.
Right? The guide dogs
The
for
blood sugar sniffing
for
dogs,
visually
seizure
impaired
dogs.
people. Yeah, like the diabetic dogs, the seizure alert dogs. Like there's really no concrete medical device that is as consistent a lot of the times as these dogs are for these people.
And as
it's so
efficient.
sad because to get these dogs trained to the capacity that you need, it's tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a lot of money, and yes, there's a lot of organizations that financially assist people to get these dogs, but they have long waiting lists. They have, so it is a lot to get a dog like this. And then there's so many cases where these people are out with their service dogs. A dog that is not qualified to be in that environment is there and attacks their service dog. And now your service dog is either fearful because of the attack, and now it can't perform its service anymore, and you're just shit out of luck.
Yeah.
Because some idiot decided they wanted to take their untrained dog and say it was a service dog out in public. Not everything is for everyone.
And that's okay.
And that's okay.
And a lot of these service dogs that pass the service dog qualification, it's a rigorous program. And guess what? The temperament is the number one thing that we're looking at. We're not looking at necessarily, yes, it is important what the dog can do and what the dog can sense and what the dog can.
It doesn't matter how well trained that dog is.
It's temperament.
If they don't have the temperament, they wash out.
Yep.
They can't be a service dog. That's just how it is. You can't have a dog that has that will use aggression as a coping mechanism. You can't have a dog overly fearful. You can't have a dog that's anxious.
Right.
You can't have a dog that's medically has issues going on. You can't have there's so many things. That's why service dogs are so freaking expensive.
Yep.
Because even places that are dedicated to just breeding labs for guide dogs, they could have a whole litter wash.
Yeah.
Even though that combination of breeding has given them good results before, there's no guarantee they're going to get that every time. It's just up to chance. So it's very, very important that if you don't need a service dog, that you're really not taking advantage of that system, because it's very unfair for people that do need them for their day-to-day life and to function with.
Yeah.
Emotional support animals, honestly, I disagree with. I don't even think it should exist. I think it's garbage. I think that you should go to therapy and figure out other coping mechanisms. Maybe that's shitty of me, but I think that emotional support animals, they don't have the same rights that a service animal would.
And that's what confuses
so
people.
What's the point?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It doesn't really make any sense.
It really, the only context that an emotional support animal is really beneficial in is if you're living in an apartment or a house that does not allow dogs, and you can get a letter from a licensed therapist or psychologist that states that you are benefited by having that dog live with you. And that can really help people that are in situations that they can't live anywhere else, but they still want their dog.
Yeah, but they're not legally required to allow you to do that.
No, they're
They
not.
can still say, no,
Yeah.
you can't have that dog if you want to live here. And they're
Yes.
within their rights to do that. They could not do that for a service dog. You can't deny rights to a service dog. But to an emotional support dog, you can deny rights. It's up to their discretion.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you took your dog in public and it was an emotional support animal, and somebody said it's being a nuisance, you have to leave my restaurant, you have to leave. So my issue with it is that it's like a gateway, because who's gonna say, if you're faking it to begin with, who's gonna say I have an emotional support dog over I have a service dog? Because if you're lying regardless, you're going to say the one that they can't kick you out for having.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
And it's pretty easy to tell. Sometimes.
Yeah, it's very easy to
people
tell.
that, lie.
And honestly, this is where my dog welfare side of me comes into play. I don't think emotional support animals are ethical for dogs, because how many emotional support animals, the animals themselves, have you met that were stable? These dogs are anxious out the fucking wazoo because they're owned by somebody who uses their dog as their ability to absorb all of their negative emotions.
And then they need an emotional support human.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, you see all those funny videos of I got a dog to emotionally support my anxiety, but now I just have an anxious dog. I fucking wonder why.
Right.
Yeah.
It's that's...
What are you doing to help the dog?
And it's
that dog is not equipped to be doing that.
Not funny, haha, but it's funny,
sad.
Yes, it's funny, sad.
It's sad.
We have to look at like our dogs as a whole, and again, like what we were talking about with the topic, how we may be creating things, and if we're putting all our anxiety and expecting an animal to fix our anxiety or work us through something,
It's not fair.
That's not really fair.
No, it's not fair because it affects their quality of life. You know, there's psychiatric service dogs. I'm all for those.
Yeah.
Because those dogs are equipped to deal with those types of things. They have the temperament necessary. But if you just go get a random dog and claim it as your emotional support animal, and then you just feed it negative energy all the time, and you hug it while you're crying, and you do all these things, that dog is not going to be stable. It's not going to be okay.
A lot of people also, like we hear a lot, is like bringing your dog on an airplane. And like they want their dog to be emotional support so they can go on that plane with them. But unfortunately, that doesn't stand either with the airlines.
Yeah, a lot of airlines have stopped accepting emotional support animals because it's such a... People don't take personal responsibility for, if I'm going to claim my dog as an emotional support animal, then I need to make sure it acts and behaves accordingly.
Right.
I mean, there were so many... I remember when this got really out of hand before the airlines really started cracking down on everything. There were so many bites. People getting bit on airplanes because of these dogs. It's just wild to me. It's very irresponsible. But yes, so when it comes to like the Canine Good Citizen, the therapy dog, the service dog field and everything, like those are just very specific criteria for very specific dogs. And if your dog can't do those things, that's fine.
It doesn't mean that your dog is bad or that your dog hasn't accomplished all that you can accomplish with them. And really, like Sport could do all of the items maybe on the CGC, but I don't think that he would ever pass because he's mentally inept. And he's just...
We love him.
We love him, but he's too unstable to the point where I couldn't guarantee that he wouldn't bite the person. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that I don't love Spork. It doesn't mean that he's not a great dog and he's well trained. Just means that Spork doesn't have the brain cells or the temperament to be able to succeed in something like that.
I kind of go by the rule of thumb where, like, if a random person coming up and touching your dog, if them, having to be handled and touching their feet and stuff like that, and then the other temperament-based items in CGC are like really loud noises, you kind of have to gauge a dog's startle response. Like, what do they do when they're startled? They're allowed to get startled, but they can't have an aggressive response to it. And they can't respond overly fearful to where they don't recover.
Or trying to bolt and then shaking.
Like So those are like when I'm testing these dogs, those are the different things I'm gauging. And if you hear any of those things and you think in your head, oh, I don't know if my dog would be okay with that, CGC probably just isn't good for you. And that's okay.
That's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay.
We had a case that we had months and months and months ago where my client really wanted the CGC, but her dog was at the most fearful. Maybe a little bit nervous. And through the training, we were able to accomplish and work on that through our 10 sessions. And the dog did end up passing, but truly the dog's temperament had improved quite a bit in being used to things. So we were able to pass the dog because that lady did have goals of taking that dog to the hospital.
And I think that that dog specifically was a really good example of the dog genetically was a little bit more reserved, but I think prior to starting training, how she interacted with the dog made it drastically worse than it maybe could have been. And so because you did training and you implemented the structure and the guidance and the leadership the dog needed, who the dog was at its core and its temperament really wasn't as severe as it was when it started.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Because once it got what it needed and it got the leadership it needed, then the dog was like, a very mild version of what it started as.
Yes. So she was able to be successful in that context, but we can't look at dogs that have had bitten people.
And I was going to say, and in that context, that dog also doesn't have like a bite history
or an aggressive side. At the most, she was like
avoidant.
Yes, avoidant of things, but
Yeah.
she did not have the genetic makeup to make her aggressive or
Yes.
bitey. So
Yeah.
unfortunately, those dogs won't pass the CGC.
Because can every dog bite? Yes. We're
If
not
it has
saying
teeth,
we're
it can bite.
Yes, we're not saying that there's dogs in the world that would never bite. We're saying that the threshold level that dogs have to what's going to cause them to bite can be so different. So different. Like there are some dogs that it would take so much to get them to bite. Like absurd things you would have to do to them to get them to bite you. And then there's dogs where you look at them the wrong way. And they're like, today's your last day, brother. Today's your last day.
Switch.
Exactly. So it's like, you just, you have to take that stuff into account.
Yep.
So to summarize today's podcast, who can we be to better lead our dogs, and what can we be doing to help our dogs' behavior improve, and really look at ourselves and like be able to judge ourselves a little bit? Are we doing things that could inevitably tarnish our training? Are we treating our dog in a certain way that's causing these issues to occur more often?
I think that was a perfect summary, Bridget.
Yes. Look at yourself and reflect inward.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
that's how you grow with yourself and in your training.
And with your dog. Yep, absolutely.
Yep. And I guess if you have a shitty dog, you're just shit out of luck. I'm sorry.
Yep. Try again later.
I'm kidding. Kind of.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us today,
Yeah.
guys.
Hope you like the new mics.
Yeah, I hope that, I wasn't just bobbing all over the place the whole time. I tried to stay relatively
Yeah,
close
you're
to the
very good at
microphone.
talking about into it because I can see the little green light flickers and my
Oh.
green light wasn't flickering and I was like, my mic's not working. But even if I do this, it's not flickering. But if you do this, then it flickers.
Oh, you cracked the code. Look,
Yeah.
there's
If it
mine
starts
goes.
flickering red, that means you're doing something bad.
Oh, wow,
If
that's
you start yelling, it'll start going red.
Interesting. Ah, oh, there it went.
yeah.
My
do
bad. Bye, guys.
Awesome.
See you later.
Bye.